The cathedral bells had been ringing for nearly an hour, but Marigold Whitcomb could not hear them anymore. Sound had narrowed to the rasp of her own breath against the inside of her veil, the rustle of ivory silk against her shoes, and the slow footsteps of her father beside her as they waited in the vestibule of St. Aldwyn's. Beyond the great oak doors, 300 guests had assembled, and somewhere among them, at the altar, stood the man she was to marry in less than a quarter of an hour. A man who had not spoken to her once in the 11 weeks since the contract had been signed. She had seen him exactly twice. Once at the betrothal dinner, where he had bowed, declined the seat beside her, and spent the evening discussing horse breeding with her father at the far end of the table. And once at the cathedral rehearsal yesterday afternoon, where he had arrived 9 minutes late and departed without offering her so much as a glance. His name was Ashford Halloran, the 6th Duke of Ravensmere, and tomorrow morning the entire kingdom would believe he loved her. "Steady, my dear." Her father's hand covered hers. Almost time. Marigold did not trust herself to answer. Her mother had warned her that morning, while pinning the lace mantilla into her hair with shaking fingers, that whatever happened today, she must not weep where anyone could see. Brides who wept were brides who had been forced, and the Whitcombs could not afford another failure. She stood very still and watched the candlelight tremble across the marble floor and counted the petals on the white roses in her bouquet. 12 roses, 47 petals, 48. She lost count and started again. The verger, a thin man with watery eyes, stepped forward and bowed. "It is time, Lord Whitcomb." Her father drew in a breath that sounded almost like a sob and turned her gently to face the doors. Marigold. He had not used her full name in years. "If I could undo this, I would. You know that." "I know, Papa. He's not a cruel man. I have made certain of it. He's only a papa. Please, if you say anything more, I shall not be able to walk." He nodded. The verger gestured to the choir. The first notes of the processional hymn rose through the doors like water rising through a sinking ship. The doors swung wide. The cathedral opened before her in a long, bright corridor of candlelight and turned faces, and Marigold Whitcomb took the first step toward the man who had not yet looked at her. She kept her eyes on the altar. She had decided last night, lying awake in her childhood bed, that she would look at her husband. If he refused to look at her, she would still look at him. She would walk the length of this aisle with her gaze fixed on his face, and if he never met her eyes, then at least she would have given the watching world the dignity of a bride who had tried. He stood with his back almost squared to her. His hands were clasped behind him in the rigid posture of a man at parade. He was tall, taller than she had remembered, and his dark coat was cut so precisely that not a thread strayed from the line of his shoulders. His hair was the color of wet earth, and as she walked, she could see the muscle along his jaw working slowly, as though he were grinding down a word he had no intention of speaking. He did not turn. Half the aisle behind her now. Somewhere among the pews sat his grandmother, the Dowager Duchess. Somewhere sat his sister, whom Marigold had never met. He still did not turn. A quarter of the aisle now. Her father's grip on her arm had begun to tremble. She tightened her own hand on his to steady him, and the gesture surprised her because she had not known until that moment that she had any steadiness to give. She was 4 steps from the altar when she did the thing she had not planned to do. She stopped walking. It was not defiance. Her body simply refused to take the next step, and her father, feeling her halt, halted with her, and the music kept playing for a measure and a half before the choirmaster realized something had gone wrong and the organ stumbled into silence. The cathedral fell quiet. It was the deep, total quiet of 300 people inhaling at the same instant and forgetting to release the breath. A child somewhere in the back coughed once and was hushed. A pew creaked. The rain whispered against the high windows. The Duke turned. He turned slowly, the way a man turns when he has been struck from behind, and is not yet certain what has hit him. His head came around first, then his shoulders, then his whole body, and his eyes found her down the long, bright corridor of the aisle, and he stopped breathing. Marigold saw it happen. She saw the precise moment his composure failed. His lips parted. His hand, which had been clasped tightly behind his back, fell open at his side. The color left his face in a single visible movement, and what remained was something raw and unguarded and terribly young. He stared at her. She stared back. Her father, beside her, made a small, confused sound. The priest at the altar lifted his prayer book and lowered it again. The Dowager Duchess in the front pew made a sharp gesture with her fan, but no one moved to obey it, because no one in the cathedral could look away from the Duke's face. He took one step toward her, then another. He came down the altar steps and into the aisle, and he kept walking, and he did not stop until he stood in front of her, and his eyes, which she could now see were gray, the color of slate after rain, searched her face beneath the veil as though he were trying to find something he had lost a very long time ago. "It is you," he said. His voice was hoarse. It was barely above a whisper, but in the silence of the cathedral, it carried. "Your Grace," Marigold said carefully, because she could not think of anything else to say. "I do not." He lifted her veil. He did it with both hands, slowly, the way a man might lift the cloth from something precious he had not seen in years. And when her face was bare to him, he made a sound that was almost a laugh, and almost not. 19 years, he said. "I have been looking for you for 19 years. And then, with the entire cathedral watching, with her father frozen at her elbow, and his grandmother rising furiously in the front pew, and the priest holding his prayer book to his chest like a shield, the Duke of Ravensmere took her hand and pressed it to his mouth, and Marigold Whitcomb, who had walked into the cathedral a souled bride, understood for the first time that she had been wrong about everything. She did not remember the rest of the ceremony. She would remember pieces of it afterward, the way one remembers fragments of a fever. The priest's voice asking the questions, her own voice answering, the cool weight of the ring sliding down her finger, and the Duke's hand, warm and not entirely steady, easing it the rest of the way home. The signing of the register, where her hand had shaken so badly that her father had to steady the pen for her. The Duke's signature beside hers, slow and careful and surprisingly large. But mostly she remembered his eyes. He did not stop looking at her. From the moment he had lifted her veil, through the vows and the blessings, and the long walk back down the aisle on his arm, his gaze had returned to her face every few seconds, as though he needed to confirm she was still there. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply looked, and the looking was a kind of heat she had never imagined a person could give off. The wedding breakfast was held at Ravensmere House on Berkeley Square. Marigold sat at the long table beside her husband and could not eat. The Duke beside her did not touch his plate either. He answered when spoken to. He responded to the toasts with the correct words in the correct order. But the answering was mechanical, and Marigold, who had spent 11 weeks studying the shape of his indifference from a distance, recognized that this was not the same man who had walked into St. Aldwyn's an hour ago. That man had been carved out of duty. This man was something else, and she did not yet know what. Across the table, the Dowager Duchess watched them both with the still, unblinking attention of a hawk on a fence post. She had not spoken since the cathedral. Twice already, when the Duke had leaned a fraction too close to Marigold to murmur something against her ear, his grandmother had set down her glass with a small crystalline click that traveled the length of the table. "Your Grace," a footman bent to murmur in Marigold's ear. "The Dowager requests a moment with you in the green drawing room before the carriages are called." She felt the Duke stiffen beside her. "I will accompany you," he said quietly. "You will not." His grandmother's voice came from across the table without rising in volume, but it cut through the surrounding conversation like a blade through silk. I shall speak with my granddaughter alone. You will remain here and attend to your guests, Ashford. That is what bridegrooms do." "Of course, grandmother." The Duke's voice was perfectly even. He turned to Marigold and offered his hand, and as she took it, he held her fingers a fraction longer than the gesture required. "I shall be in the library when you are finished. Whenever you are finished." The last word carried weight. She followed the footman from the dining room, with her train gathered over her arm. By the time the footman opened the green drawing room door, Marigold's hands were cold to the wrist, and the Dowager Duchess was already inside, standing at the window, with her back to the room. The door closed. "Sit, child." Marigold sat. The Dowager did not turn. She was a tall woman, unbent by age, her silver hair gathered high under a black lace cap. She wore mourning still, 6 years after her son's death, and the black silk of her gown made her seem cut from the same stone as the room. "Tell me," the Dowager said to the window, "what passed between you and my grandson before this morning?" "Nothing, Your Grace. Do not insult me. I am not insulting you. I am answering you." Marigold's voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "I have met your grandson twice in my life, once at the betrothal dinner in February and once at the rehearsal yesterday. He did not speak to me on either occasion. I have never been alone in a room with him. I have never written him a letter. I have never received one from him. Until today, I believed he disliked me, and I believed he had reason to, because my father owes his estate a great deal of money, and I am the form in which that debt is being repaid." The Dowager turned. She had pale eyes, paler than her grandson's, and they took Marigold in slowly from the slippers up. "You are direct. I have been told it is one of my faults, Your Grace. It is, but it is also useful, and we have very little time." The Dowager crossed the room and sat opposite her. "Listen to me carefully, Marigold. My grandson is a man who feels too much and shows too little, and the combination has nearly destroyed him twice already. 19 years ago, when he was 12 years old and had been sent to recover from a fever, he found something on a beach in Northumberland. He has never told me what. He has carried it ever since. And today, in the cathedral, he saw your face, and he knew. The room had become very quiet. Marigold's hands had gone numb in her lap. Your Grace, her voice scraped. I have never been to Northumberland. The Dowager's eyes did not change. No, she said. I did not think you had. Then he has made a mistake, Marigold said. Yes. The Dowager folded her hands. He has made a mistake. And the mistake, my dear, is now your husband. The library of Ravensmere House faced the garden. Long windows, opened a finger's width against the rain, let in the smell of wet boxwood and the distant drip of water from the eaves. Books rose floor to ceiling on 3 walls, dark with age. A fire had been lit despite the season, and the Duke stood before it, with one hand braced against the marble of the mantel, looking down into the flames as though they had wronged him personally. He turned when the door opened. He saw her face, and whatever he had been about to say died in his throat. She has told you, he said. She has told me what she believes. Marigold stepped into the room and closed the door behind herself. I should like to hear what you believe, Your Grace. Ashford, I beg your pardon. My name is Ashford. You are my wife. A muscle worked in his jaw. I should like very much for you to use my name, if you can bear to. She had not been prepared for that. She had been prepared for cold formality, or for some impassioned outpouring she would have to resist. She had not been prepared for him to ask, quietly and with what looked very much like fear, that she call him by his given name. Ashford, she said. He closed his eyes for one beat, opened them. Thank you. I am told, she said carefully, that 19 years ago you found something in Northumberland. Yes. And that today, in the cathedral, you believed it had to do with me. Yes. I have never been to Northumberland, Your Grace. Ashford. I have never been north of Yorkshire in my life. I do not know what you saw when you turned this morning, but it cannot have been a memory. I am not the woman you are looking for. She kept her voice level. I am sorry. He did not move from the mantel. For a long moment, he only looked at her. May I ask you something, he said at last, before you decide what I have or have not done? Yes. Have you ever, in your life, owned a small enamel locket, pale green, about the size of a sovereign, with a sprig of rosemary painted on the front in gold? The room tilted. Marigold's hand rose to her throat before she could stop it. Her fingers closed around nothing, because she had taken the locket off this morning, as her mother had instructed, because it did not match the pearls. It lay at this moment on the dressing table of her childhood bedroom in Cheapside, wrapped in a square of gray linen, as it had every night for the past 19 years. Her grandmother had given it to her when she was 3. There had never been a question of giving it back. She could not speak. I see, the Duke said softly. Where? She said, and her voice came out wrong. Where did you see it? I did not see it. He had not moved. I painted it. I painted it from memory, the autumn after I found it, on a small panel of birch wood, and I have carried the panel in the inside pocket of every coat I have owned since. It is in the coat I am wearing now. He reached into his breast pocket. He drew out a small, flat object wrapped in oilcloth, and he unwrapped it, and he held it across the room toward her on the flat of his palm. Marigold did not move. The fire popped. The rain murmured. The only thing that was real was the small painted panel in the Duke's hand, and the small enamel locket on her dressing table in Cheapside, and the impossible distance between them that had just collapsed into nothing. I was 9, she heard herself say. I was 9 years old. I lost the locket at the seaside, at Whitby. It was returned to me 3 weeks later, in a parcel with no name on it. My mother said a fisherman must have found it. Her own voice sounded very far away. I was 9. The Duke's hand was shaking. I was 12, he said. I was 12, and I had been sent to Northumberland for the summer to recover from a fever, and I walked along the strand at low tide and found a small green locket in the sand, and I knew, even then, even at 12, that it belonged to someone I was not going to be allowed to keep. So I painted it before I sent it back. And I have looked for the girl who lost it in every face I have passed for 19 years. The painted panel trembled on his palm. I did not see a memory in the cathedral this morning, he said. I saw a locket. I saw a sprig of rosemary. I saw a face I had been carrying since I was 12 years old. And I saw it walking toward me down an aisle in a wedding gown. And Marigold, please, please tell me I have not lost my mind. She crossed the room. She did not remember deciding to cross it. She crossed the room, and she took the painted panel from his hand, and she turned it over in her fingers. And there on the back, in a child's careful hand, were 3 words in faded brown ink. And she read them, and her knees gave. The Duke caught her before she fell. He went down with her, onto the carpet before the fire, his arms around her, and her wedding gown spreading in a wide white pool around them both. And Marigold Whitcomb, who that morning had been a sold bride, opened her hand and read the 3 words again. And the words were, "Please come back." Outside, the rain was beginning to ease, and somewhere in the house, the Dowager Duchess was already writing the letter that would change everything. She did not weep. She had told herself in the vestibule that morning that she would not, and the promise held even now, even kneeling on the carpet of a strange library, with her husband's arms around her, and a painted locket pressed between her palms. But she shook for a long time, in long, slow waves she could not stop, and the Duke held her without speaking, and without trying to make her stop. "I cannot think," she said into his shoulder. "You do not have to." "I should. There is a house full of guests, and your grandmother and my father, and the priest will want to know whether I am in mourning for my own wedding. And I cannot, Ashford. I cannot. Then do not. His hand moved against her back, a slow, careful pressure through the silk. I have been thinking for 19 years, and it has not done me a great deal of good. We can stop, the two of us, for a quarter of an hour. She laughed. It surprised her. It was a small, wet laugh that came out against his coat. And it surprised him too, because she felt him still for a moment, and then she felt the very faint movement of his own breath, almost a laugh, and not quite, against the top of her head. A quarter of an hour, she said. And then we shall pretend to be a duke and a duchess for the rest of the afternoon. And tonight, when the house is quiet, I should like to sit with you in this room and tell you everything I remember about a girl on a beach when I was 12 years old. If you can bear it. I can bear it. He helped her up. Her mantilla had come loose on one side and was hanging at her shoulder like a captured bird. The Duke saw it. He lifted his hands as if to fix it, and then stopped, his fingers a fraction from her hair. "May I?" he said. She nodded. He pinned the lace back into place. His hands were not entirely steady, and twice the pin slipped, and he had to begin again. And the second time he murmured an apology so quietly, she almost did not hear it. It was the gentleness that startled her. He was careful of her scalp. "I shall go down first," he said. "Take whatever time you need." "Ashford." He paused at the door. "I do not understand any of this," she said, "but I am not afraid of you. I want you to know that. Whatever else is true today, I am not afraid of you." He closed his eyes. He did not turn around. He stood with one hand on the door for a long moment, and then he said, very quietly, "Thank you," and he left. Marigold stood alone in the library and let her breath out slowly. She walked the slow circuit of the room. On the writing desk by the window lay a half-written letter, abandoned in mid-sentence, addressed to a bank in Edinburgh, and the figure beneath the salutation was twice the size of her father's debt, as she had been told it. A soft scratching at the lower panel of the door interrupted her. She crossed the room and opened it a few inches, and a small gray dog with a face like an offended philosopher squeezed through the gap and sat down on her train. "Oh," Marigold said. The dog regarded her. "I do not think we have been introduced," she said. The dog did not blink. "You are sitting on my gown." The dog did not move. A young woman appeared in the doorway, breathless and laughing. She was perhaps 18. She wore green muslin, and her dark hair was pinned in a way that suggested she had pinned it herself in a hurry. Her eyes were the same slate gray as the Duke's. "Oh, no," the young woman said. "Oh, Tompkin, you absolute scoundrel. He's yours. He's the household's, technically. He belongs to Cook, who feeds him, and to my brother, who pays for his veterinary follies, and to me, who has to apologize for him. I am desperately sorry." She came into the room and gathered up the dog, who suffered the indignity, with the air of a king being escorted to his coronation. "I am Phaedra," she said. "I am Ashford's sister. I have been told, on pain of grandmother's displeasure, not to come and find you for at least another half-hour, but I am very bad at pain, on pain of anything. And Tompkin escaped. And so here we are. Hello. Hello." Marigold could not help smiling. "I am Marigold. Yes, I know. I have been hearing about you for weeks, mostly from my grandmother, who did not approve of you, and then this morning from absolutely everyone in the cathedral, who all approve of you a great deal more than they did at breakfast." Phaedra grinned. "Listen, I am not supposed to know what happened in here just now, but I know my brother, and I have not seen him look like he looked when he came past me in the corridor for 6 years. Whatever you are, Marigold, whatever you turn out to be, I am on your side, before grandmother gets to you again. She has already got to me. Then you know what you are dealing with." "Good," I am very bad at being a sister. I am bossy, and I talk too much, and I will absolutely tell you things you should not know. But I have wanted a sister since I was 4 years old, and you appear, by some miracle, to be one. Phaedra. Yes, I do not yet know what I am, but I should like to know you while I find out. Phaedra's grin widened. Oh good, she said. Then come and meet the dog properly. He likes almost no one. It will infuriate grandmother. The remainder of the wedding day passed in a slow procession of carriages and farewells. Marigold's father embraced her in the entrance hall before he climbed into his hired coach, and he held her for a fraction longer than the gesture required, and when he stepped back, his face was wet, and he did not bother to hide it. Her mother had not come. Supper was small. The Duke, his sister, Marigold, and the rain. Phaedra carried the conversation almost single-handedly. The Duke, watching her, smiled twice in a way that Marigold suspected he had not smiled in months. When the plates had been cleared, Phaedra rose and announced that she was suddenly exhausted and would see them both at breakfast, and absolutely not before. She left, taking the dog and most of the air out of the room with her. The Duke stood. He held out his hand. You said tonight, he said. I did. The library is warmer than this room. I had the fire built up an hour ago. She took his hand. The library, when they entered it, had been transformed. Heavy curtains had been drawn against the dark. A tray of tea sat on the low table between the 2 leather chairs by the fire. A soft woolen shawl had been laid across the arm of the chair on the right, as though anticipating that she might be cold, and Marigold understood that he had given the orders himself, and that he had been thinking about her shoulders. She sat. She drew the shawl around herself. He sat opposite her. I do not know how to begin, he said at last. Then do not begin at the beginning. Begin at the part that is easiest to say. He almost smiled. Very well. He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees, and he watched the fire. The easiest part. I was 12. I had been ill in the spring with a fever they thought might kill me, and when it did not, my father sent me to Northumberland for the summer to recover. There was a house there that belonged to a cousin of his. It stood a quarter-mile back from the Strand. I was forbidden almost everything, but I was allowed to walk on the beach in the early mornings as long as I didn't go below the tide line. I walked there every day for 3 months. I was the loneliest creature alive. I walked along that strand at 6 every morning, telling no one and meeting no one, until the 37th morning. The 37th. I counted them. I had nothing else to do. He glanced at her. On the 37th morning, I found a small green locket half buried in the wet sand. There was a sprig of rosemary painted on the front. I picked it up. I sat down on a rock with it in my hand. I knew, the moment I saw it, that it belonged to a child, and that the child had cried when she lost it, and that whoever she was, somewhere in the world, she was missing at that very moment. And I did not want to give it back. He said the last sentence with the kind of quiet that suggested he had been ashamed of it for 19 years. I kept it for 3 weeks. I kept it under my pillow. I took it out at night, and I held it, and I made up stories about who she might be. And then, one morning, I woke up, and I knew that I had to send it back, that whatever I was doing was wrong, that I was a thief. So I painted it. I had a paint box. I painted the locket from memory on a piece of birchwood the size of my palm, and I wrote 3 words on the back, "Please come back," although I did not know to whom, and I wrapped the locket itself in a square of linen, and I gave it to the cousin's housekeeper, who promised to find a way to return it through the local constable. 3 weeks later, I overheard her telling my father's valet that the locket had been restored to a small girl in Yorkshire, whose father had taken her to Whitby for the summer. My father, Marigold said. Yes. My father took us to Whitby. He took me and my younger sister. We were there for 6 weeks. I cried for 3 days when I lost the locket. I know. I have imagined it. He paused. Marigold. I have imagined it almost every day since. She held the shawl tighter around her shoulders. What did you imagine? She said. I imagined that she had grown up. I imagined that wherever she was loved, and she had kept the locket, and she remembered, in some half-conscious way, that someone she had never met had wanted her to have it back. I made her up. I gave her a face. I painted the panel a second time when I was 19 because the first one had faded in my pocket. He was quiet for a moment. It became a kind of madness, he said. After my father died, when the title and the estates and the responsibilities all came down on me at once, the story stopped being small. I began to look. I hired men. I sent inquiries to Yorkshire. I tried to find a record, a christening, a name, anything. I never found her. I had nearly given up entirely when my grandmother told me she had arranged a marriage for me with the daughter of a man I owed nothing to, and who owed me everything. And I agreed to the marriage because I no longer cared what happened to me. And I refused to meet you because I did not want to know your face. I did not want to compare it to the face I had been carrying and find it wanting. He stopped. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes. I am sorry. I'm sorry for those 11 weeks. I am sorry for the rehearsal yesterday. I am sorry for every hour I left you to wonder what you had done to deserve it. I did not know it was you, Marigold. If I had known, I would have been at your door the morning the contract was signed. The fire shifted. A log fell. Sparks rose against the brickwork and died. Marigold looked at the man across from her, and she understood, with a clarity that almost frightened her, that she had begun the day married to a stranger, and would end it married to someone else entirely. The man at the altar that morning had been a duty. The man in this chair was a wound that had been waiting 19 years to be touched. Ashford. Yes. My locket is in Cheapside. It is on the dressing table in my old room. My mother told me to leave it. She said it did not match the pearls. He was silent. Tomorrow, she said. I should like to send for it. He looked at her. Yes, he said. His voice was not steady. Tomorrow, you may send for anything in the world. She woke in a strange bed, in a strange room, with the rain still falling against the windows, and the certain knowledge that she had slept, deeply and dreamlessly, for the first time in 11 weeks. A bed so wide she could have lain across it sideways, and not touched either edge. A little vase of fresh white roses on the writing desk by the window. And beside the vase, a folded note in a hand, she now recognized, weighted with a small, smooth stone, the color of slate. She read the note before she rose. I shall be in the library at any hour you wish. There is no obligation in this house today, none at all, except whatever you choose to set yourself. Phaedra is forbidden from disturbing you before you ring for her, on penalty of the dog being washed. The garden is yours if the rain stops. So am I, if you will have me. A. She read it twice. A young woman she had not seen before came up with the tray. She was perhaps 19, with a freckled nose, and the kind of red hair that would not stay tidy under a cap, and she introduced herself as Adrian, which she pronounced with the patient air of someone who had pronounced it for a great many people who had got it wrong. I am to be your maid, your grace, if you will have me. Lady Phaedra recommended me. Adrian. Yes, your grace. Did Lady Phaedra warn you about me? Adarian considered. She said you were kind, your grace, and that you had had a difficult morning yesterday, and that I was to bring you tea before anything else, and not ask questions until you had drunk it. That is sound advice. Lady Phaedra often gives sound advice, your grace. She just wraps it in a great deal of nonsense first. Marigold smiled into her tea. She breakfasted alone in the small morning room overlooking the garden. The Duke did not appear. He was a man who did not yet know how to ask for things, now that the thing he had wanted for 19 years was sitting 2 rooms away eating toast. She finished her tea. She walked to the library on her own. He was there. He was at the writing desk by the window, and he had clearly been there for some time, because there were 3 letters already sealed at his elbow. But when she entered, he stood at once, and he looked, in the morning light, both younger and more tired than he had the night before. "You slept," he said. "I did." "Did you?" "Some." "Some is not very much. It was more than I expected." He gestured toward the fire. "Will you sit? I've asked for fresh tea. I should have asked you to breakfast with me, but I did not want to presume, and now I am regretting both decisions. You can ask me tomorrow." "I shall." She sat. She arranged the shawl. Ashford. "Yes. How long since you have been in this house for more than a week at a time?" He paused with his hand on the bell pull. "Since my father died. And before that, I lived here. With him. After my mother died, when I was 8, my father and I lived in this house together for almost 12 years. He died in this house, in the room above the breakfast room, and you have been somewhere else ever since. I have been on the estates, in Scotland, in Ireland. I have been almost everywhere except here." "Why?" He came back to the fire. He stood with his hand on the back of the chair opposite hers. "Because the house remembers him," he said. "And I have not been ready, until now, to share a memory with anyone. Ashford. Will you tell me one thing about him that you have not told anyone? I do not need it to be a large thing. A small thing will do. I should like to know one small, true thing about your father, because he is half the reason you are the man you are, and the man you are is now, by an accident I do not yet understand. Mine." He stared at her. For a long moment he did not speak. Then he sat down very slowly across from her, as though sitting required more attention than he had to spare. "Marigold. Yes, you are not what I expected. I am not what I expected either." He almost laughed. He pressed both hands flat against his knees, as though grounding himself. He whistled, he said. "I beg your pardon. My father. The one small true thing." He whistled. Always. Constantly. He was famous for it among the staff, who had to learn to recognize him by sound, because he never knocked. He simply whistled his way down a corridor and into whichever room he wanted to be in. He whistled the same 6 bars of a country tune for nearly 40 years, and I do not know what the tune was called. And after he died, I tried to find it. In books, in collections, in every place I could think of, and I have never identified it. But I would know it the moment I heard it. I have not heard it since the afternoon he died. He stopped. He looked at his hands. "That is the small thing," he said. Adarin arrived with the fresh tea then, set the tray down, and withdrew. The door closed behind her, and Marigold reached across the small table between them and took her husband's hand, and held it, very gently, the way one might hold something that had been broken once and mended imperfectly. He did not pull away. He turned his hand over in hers and laced his fingers through her fingers, and they sat that way without speaking, until a footman appeared in the doorway. "Your Grace. A gentleman is asking for the Duchess." The Duke frowned. "At this hour." "He says he is the Duchess's brother, Your Grace. He says it is urgent." Marigold set down her cup. She had 2 younger sisters and no brothers. She knew exactly one young man who would arrive at the door of Ravensmere House on the morning after her wedding, claim a relationship that did not exist, and call it urgent. She had not seen him in 3 years. He had told her, the last time she had seen him, that he would not come to her wedding. He had told her he would die before he came. "Show him in," she said. The footman bowed and withdrew. The Duke was watching her. "Marigold." "He is not my brother," she said quietly. "He is the man I was supposed to marry." He came into the library with his hat still in his hand, and the reins still on his shoulders, and Marigold knew, before he had crossed half the room, that he had not slept. Linus Caro had always been beautiful in a way that made strangers turn around in the street to look at him a second time, and 3 years of whatever life he had been living since she had last seen him had not yet undone the beauty. But it had thinned it. His face was sharper. His coat, which had once been very fine, had been brushed too many times, and the cuffs were beginning to fray. He saw the Duke first. He stopped 2 paces inside the door and bowed, neither too deeply nor too shallowly. "Your Grace, I apologize for the intrusion." "You are not intruding." The Duke had not risen. He sat in his chair by the fire, with his teacup balanced on one knee, and his face arranged in the particular flat civility that Marigold was beginning to recognize as the expression he wore when he was furious. "My wife was expecting you." My wife. Linus's eyes moved to Marigold for the first time and held. "Yes, Goldie. Do not call me that." He flinched. He covered it quickly, but she saw it, and she felt, to her own surprise, no satisfaction in it at all. What she felt, mostly, was tired. "Marigold," he said. "I beg your pardon." "Marigold, may I speak with you? Alone, if your husband will permit it." "My husband," she said, "will not permit it." "Then with him present, if you prefer." She glanced at the Duke. He had set down his teacup. His hand rested loosely on the arm of the chair, but Marigold saw that the knuckles were white. "Sit down, Mr. Caro," the Duke said. "There is tea. My wife will tell me when she would like you to leave." Linus sat. Marigold did not help him. Did not. She thought about the boy who had ridden up to her father's house 3 years ago and asked her to marry him, and about the morning she had seen him alive in a newspaper after a year of mourning him as dead. Marigold. His voice cracked on the second syllable. "I came as soon as I heard. I was in Bristol. I did not know about the wedding until the day before yesterday. I rode through the night." "You wrote to me," she said. He stopped. "You wrote to me 3 weeks ago. I have the letter. You wrote to me 3 weeks ago and you told me that you had heard about the engagement, and you begged me not to go through with it, and you asked me to meet you at the Golden Heart in Holborn at 6 in the evening on the 12th of April. I did not come, Linus. I did not come. And you know I did not come, because the next morning you wrote me a second letter, in which you accused me of choosing money over love, and said that you would not trouble me again. I read it twice. I burned it the second time, so please do not tell me that you have only just heard." The library was very quiet. "I was angry," Linus said. His voice was low. "Marigold, I was angry. I wrote that letter the night I received yours, and I should not have sent it. But I came back. I came back to London a week ago. I have been trying to find a way to see you. I went to your father's house yesterday morning. He would not admit me. I went to the cathedral last night to look at the door, only to look at the door, and I stood in the rain until 2 in the morning, and I knew I could not stop the wedding. But I had to come this morning, because if I did not come and tell you what I am about to tell you, I would not be able to live the rest of my life." "What are you about to tell me?" He looked at her. "That the letter was a lie," he said. "The letter saying I had died. The letter your father showed you. I did not write it. I was not killed at sea. I was alive when you received it. And I did not know that letter existed until I came back to England 18 months ago and saw your face from across a coffee house, and you turned away from me as though I were a ghost. Marigold. Your father wrote it." The room tilted. She felt the Duke's hand close gently around hers. She had not seen him reach for her, but his hand was around hers, warm and steady, and her own hand, she realized, had begun to shake. "That is not possible," she said. "It is. I have proof. I have the original draft. He kept it in his writing desk for 3 years, and he did not remember to burn it before the bailiffs came, and one of the bailiffs gave it to a man who owed me a favor. I have been carrying it in my coat for 14 months. Your father ended my life on paper, because he wanted you to marry the man he had chosen for you instead, who was not me, and was not the Duke either, and was a wine merchant in Lambeth, whose money would have settled half his debts. The wine merchant died of an apoplexy, and your father was forced to look elsewhere. He reached into his coat. He drew out a folded paper, brown at the edges with age, and he laid it on the small table between them. I am not here to ask you to leave him, Marigold, he said. I saw your face when I walked in. I saw his face. I am too late, and I know it. I am here because you deserve to know, but I will not lie to you any longer by my silence. He stood. He bowed to the Duke. Your Grace, I will not trouble your house again. He turned and walked out. The door closed behind him. Marigold did not move. She stared at the folded paper, and after a long moment, the Duke gently let go of her hand, and rose, and crossed to the door, and locked it. He came back to her. He knelt in front of her chair. Marigold. My father wrote it. Yes. My father wrote a letter, saying that the boy I loved was dead, and he showed it to me, and he watched me cry. Yes. She closed her eyes. She felt his hands take hold of hers, and she felt his forehead press against her knuckles. I do not know what to do, she said. You do not have to know yet. I am very angry, Ashford. You have every right to be. I am not angry at you. I know. She opened her eyes. She freed one hand and laid it on the back of his head, and his hair was warm and slightly damp from the fire, and she held him there for a long moment and felt, somewhere low in her chest, the slow turning of something she had been carrying for 3 years, finally beginning to come loose. Read the letter, she said. He read it. She watched the muscle along his jaw work twice. It is genuine, he said. You can tell. I can tell. I have seen your father's hand on a great many promissory notes. I am sorry. It is genuine. She nodded slowly. Then I should like, she said, to go and walk in the garden, even if it is still raining. I find that I cannot sit in this room any longer. Yes, he brought her shawl and her cloak and put them on her with the same careful attention he had used to pin her mantilla the day before, and he opened the long doors that gave onto a small terrace, and he did not follow her out. She walked alone. The rain, which had eased at last, fell only as a thin gray mist, and she walked the gravel path along the boxwood, and somewhere in the middle of her thinking, she began to laugh, and the laugh was not happy and not bitter, but a third thing, a thing she didn't have a name for, and she laughed until her ribs ached. When she came back inside, her husband was waiting in the open doorway with a fresh towel in his hands. He did not ask her what she had decided. He simply dried her hair. The dowager sent for her at 4. The summons was delivered by Adrian, who had clearly been instructed to soften it, and who managed the softening by adding that the dowager had also asked Cook to send up the lemon biscuits, which were the closest thing the dowager possessed to an olive branch. She is not pleased about something, Your Grace, but she is also not entirely displeased. Lady Phaedra says it is best to enter very straight-backed and to compliment the room. Compliment the room. It is the green sitting room, Your Grace. Lady Phaedra says compliments to the room are taken as compliments to the dowager by a kind of short-distance proxy. Aderin, I am very glad you are mine. The freckled girl curtsied, smiling. The green sitting room was smaller and warmer than the drawing room, with a fire that smelled faintly of applewood. The dowager was already seated. She did not rise. She gestured to the chair opposite, and Marigold, taking Aderin's advice with the seriousness it deserved, said quietly, on her way to it, What a lovely room, Your Grace. It catches the afternoon light beautifully. The dowager's eyes flicked up. Did Phaedra coach you? Aderin coached me. Phaedra coached Aderin. I see. The dowager's mouth twitched. Sit down. Marigold sat. The dowager poured the tea herself, 2 cups, and pushed Marigold's cup across the small table without asking how she took it. Marigold accepted it as offered. Plain. No milk, no sugar, the dowager noticed. My grandson, the dowager said. told me this morning what passed in the library yesterday. The locket, the painted panel, the story of the Strand. He told me because I asked, and because he is, despite a great deal of evidence to the contrary, an honest man. I should like to ask you something, Marigold. Do you believe him? I believe him, Your Grace. Why? Marigold considered. Because the panel is real, she said. Because the writing on the back is in a child's hand. Because no man in possession of his senses would invent a story so absurd in order to soften 11 weeks of cold behavior. And because, when he showed it to me, he was as frightened of being wrong as I was. The Dowager nodded slowly. That is the answer I hoped for. It is also the answer I needed. May I ask why? Because, my dear, I have not believed him for 19 years. I have believed that he invented her. I have believed that the panel was a memorial to a fixation. I told him, when he was 22, that he would never find her. And I told him because I believed he was protecting himself from the world by waiting for a person who did not exist. I have been wrong, evidently, about something I was very certain of, and I find that I dislike being wrong, but I dislike it less than I would dislike the alternative, which is being wrong without admitting it. So I am admitting it. To you. Once, and only once. Do not expect me to admit it again. Marigold lifted her tea to hide her face. Now, the Dowager set down her own cup. There is a second matter. The young man this morning. Linus Caro. Your Grace, the under-butler told me. Tell me what he wanted. So Marigold told her. She told her in plain language, and the Dowager listened without interrupting. Your father, the Dowager said at last. Yes. Wrote the letter. Yes. To clear the way for a wine merchant who would have settled half his debts. Yes. And when the wine merchant died, your father turned to my grandson. That appears to be the case, Your Grace. I see. The Dowager rose. She crossed to the window. She stood with her hands clasped behind her, and when she spoke again, it was without turning. Marigold. Your Grace. I have buried a husband and a son. I do not say so for sympathy. I say so to give weight to what I am about to tell you. There are very few things in this world that disgust me so profoundly as a man who weaponizes his own daughter's grief. Your father has done so. He has done so deliberately, with foresight, and he has profited by it twice. But I can promise you this. Here, today, in this room. He will not profit by it a third time. Whatever portion of his debt to my grandson remains unsettled, I shall settle it personally tomorrow morning. And I shall do so on terms that ensure he does not see another farthing of Ravensmere money for as long as I draw breath. I am informing you out of courtesy. Marigold could not speak. Furthermore, the Dowager said, still at the window, the young man this morning. He came to the door of this house, in the rain, on the day after your wedding, and he told you the truth at considerable cost to himself, and he left without making demands. A man who behaves so is not a man without honor. I do not know what he is to you now. I do not need to know, but I shall not have him left to drift. And so tomorrow afternoon I shall send a man to find Mr. Caro and to inform him that there is a position on one of the northern estates which has been vacant for some months, and which carries a salary sufficient to keep him in coats that do not fray at the cuffs. Whether he accepts is his concern. Whether you ever see him again is yours. Marigold set down her tea because her hand had begun to shake. Your Grace, do not thank me. I was not going to. The Dowager turned. She raised an eyebrow. I was going to say, Marigold said, that I think I begin to understand why your grandson loves you. The Dowager held very still. For a long moment she did not move. Then she crossed back to the chair and sat down, and she lifted her cup, and she said, very quietly, almost to herself, my son used to say something similar. It was always a great inconvenience to me. She drank her tea. Marigold drank hers. When the dowager finally rose to dismiss her, she paused at the door with one hand on the handle and said, without looking back, "Your husband is in the music room. He has not been in the music room since his father died. You will know what to do." She opened the door. She left first. Marigold sat alone for one more breath, and she thought of her husband, whistling for a tune he could not name, and she rose, and she went to find the music room. The music room was at the far end of the east wing. The door was ajar. She did not knock. She paused with her hand on the frame and looked in, and her husband was sitting on the bench of an old square piano, with his back to the door and his hands resting flat on the closed lid. He did not turn. Ashford. He did not look up. "My grandmother sent you," he said. "She told me where you were. She did not send me. There is a difference. There is." She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. The room was smaller than she had expected, and very plain. A pianoforte by one wall. The square piano he sat at by another. A long mirror over the mantel, in which she could see his face from across the room, even though he had not turned. He looked, in the mirror, like a man who had been standing in a high wind for a long time and had only just sat down. This was his room, he said. My father's. It was where he came when the rest of the house was too loud. He played terribly. Worse than terribly. He had no ear at all, but he loved the piano, and he was the only person I have ever known who derived genuine pleasure from making noise that no one else wanted to hear. Your mother played. Beautifully. She stopped after she married him. She said his pleasure was greater than hers, and that there was only room in one marriage for one of them to enjoy themselves at an instrument. She told me this when I was 7. It was one of the last things she told me. She died 3 weeks later. Marigold crossed the room. She did not sit on the bench beside him. She stood at his shoulder, close enough that her sleeve brushed his sleeve, and she rested her hand on the closed lid of the piano beside his hand. "You have not opened it," she said. "No." Since the afternoon he died. I came in here that night. I closed the lid. I have not opened it again. Will you open it now?" He did not move. "I do not know what I shall do if I open it," he said. "I have not known for 6 years what I shall do." "Then do not imagine it. Open it." He turned his head. He looked at her properly for the first time since she had come into the room, and his face was very tired and very young. He lifted the lid. He did it slowly, with both hands. The hinges were stiff with disuse. The keys, when they appeared, were yellowed at the edges. He looked at them for a long time. "I do not remember the tune," he said. "The one he whistled. I have tried. I have tried for 6 years. I cannot remember the tune. The thing I most wanted to keep is the thing I most thoroughly lost." Ashford. "Yes. My grandmother sang." He looked at her. "My grandmother, on my mother's side. She sang. She had a small voice and a very good ear. And when I was little, before she died, she taught me a great many tunes. Country tunes, mostly. I do not know if it will be his tune. But I should like, if you will let me, to whistle a few of them. And if any of them is the one, you will know." He stared at her. "You would do that," he said. "Yes. Now. Now. Or in an hour. Or tomorrow. Whenever you can bear it. Now." She drew in her breath. She did not sing. She had never been able to sing. But she could whistle, because her grandmother had taught her, secretly, against her mother's wishes, that whistling was unladylike. And Marigold's grandmother had said, at the age of 73, that being ladylike was overrated, and that a girl who could not whistle could not call her own dog. She whistled the first tune. It was a Yorkshire dance air her grandmother had loved. The Duke listened without moving. When she finished, he shook his head, very slightly, and she went on to the second. She whistled 6 tunes. She whistled the 7th. On the 7th, his hand closed around the edge of the piano so tightly the knuckles showed white, and she stopped before she had finished the second bar. "Yes," he said. His voice was almost inaudible. "Yes. Marigold. That is the tune. Shall I finish it?" "Yes." She finished it. It was a simple tune, 6 bars long, the kind that lodges in the ear and refuses to leave. She whistled it twice through. The second time, her husband closed his eyes, and a single line of wet ran down the side of his face and disappeared into his collar. And he did not lift his hand to wipe it, because his hand was on the piano, and the piano, at this particular moment, was holding him up. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Sit beside me." She sat. He did not play. He simply sat on the bench beside her, with the lid of the piano open and his father's tune still in the air between them, and he leaned his head, very slowly, until his temple rested against her shoulder, and he stayed there for a long time. And Marigold Halloran, who 2 days ago had been Marigold Whitcomb, sat very still and let her husband grieve, properly and without performance, for the first time in 6 years. When at last he straightened, his eyes were red, but his face was clearer than she had seen it. "Marigold, yes. I do not know how to be married to you. I do not know how to be married to you either. Will you forgive me, in advance, for a great many small failures? Only if you will forgive me the same." He took her hand. He turned it palm up. He pressed his mouth to the inside of her wrist, very lightly, and she felt the warmth of his breath, and she felt the whole of her own pulse rise to meet it. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For the tune." "Ashford. Yes, it was your gift, not mine. I only carried it for a little while." He did not answer. He pressed her wrist once more against his lips and let her hand go, and he closed the lid of the piano, gently, and they went to dinner. A letter arrived in the morning. It came on the second post, but Adrian, who had a sense for these things that bordered on the supernatural, intercepted the tray and set the single envelope beside Marigold's plate with the quiet murmur, "From your mother, your grace," and withdrew. Marigold knew her mother's hand. She also knew that her mother had not written to her since the engagement had been announced. She turned the envelope over twice before she opened it. The Duke watched her without comment. She read. The letter was 3 pages. It began in the first line with the words, "My darling, I should have told you." When she had finished, she folded all 3 pages back into the envelope with the care of a woman handling a wound, and she said, without looking up, she knew. About the letter. About all of it. She knew when my father wrote it. She did not know he would send it. She believed until the day he showed it to me that he had only drafted it as a way of working through his own anger. When he showed it to me, when he watched me cry, she was in the next room, and she heard me, and she did not come in. She writes that she has not slept properly since. She writes that she has been waiting for 3 years for the moment when she would be able to tell me, and that she has not had the courage, and that she is now writing because Mr. Caro appeared at her door yesterday afternoon. The Duke did not speak. She asks, she said, whether I will see her. What will you say? She thought of her mother on her wedding morning, pinning the lace mantilla into her hair with shaking fingers. She thought of her mother in the room next to hers 3 years ago, listening to her cry and not coming in, and waking, presumably, every morning since, with that not coming in still in her chest. I shall say yes, she said. Today, if she can come. I shall say that she may come this afternoon, and that she should come alone. I shall send the carriage. Thank you. And I shall not be in the house when she arrives. She looked up at him. You do not have to leave, she said. I know, but I shall. There are some conversations that should not be observed by anyone, even kindly. I shall be at the club until you send for me. Ashford. Yes, You are very good at this." He almost smiled. "I am very bad at this. I am only learning to listen to my grandmother, who is occasionally very good at this, and who told me at 6 o'clock this morning that I should leave the house this afternoon and let you have your mother to yourself. She told you this at 6 in the morning. She came to my study. She did not knock. She said, 'Ashford, do not be useful in the wrong way today.' And she went out again. I've been thinking about it for 3 hours and concluded that she was correct and that I should stop being surprised by it." Marigold laughed. The carriage went. Her mother arrived at 3. She came into the small parlor Marigold had requested for the meeting, and she stopped just inside the door, and she looked at Marigold, and Marigold looked at her, and neither of them moved for a long moment. Her mother had aged. 11 weeks had done what years sometimes do not, and she stood thinner in her gray traveling dress, with new lines at the corners of her mouth, and her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Mama, my darling." She did not embrace at once. They stood looking at each other, hands not quite touching, and her mother said, in a voice that was hardly a voice, "I have been waiting to be punished for 3 years. I will accept whatever you say to me, Marigold. Mama, sit down." They sat. Marigold did not say what she had thought she might say. The woman opposite her was older and smaller and frightened, and Marigold understood, in the same clear way she had understood her husband's grief in the music room the night before, that her mother had been carrying this letter inside herself for 3 years, and that the carrying had cost her a great deal. "Mama, yes, I want to know everything." So her mother told her. She told her about the night the letter was drafted. She told her about the morning it was sent, which she had not known about until afterwards. She told her about the day her father had shown it to Marigold and watched her cry, and about the night, the same night, when she had confronted her husband in their bedroom, and he had told her, in a voice she had never heard from him before, that the family would not survive without the wine merchant's money, and that he would do it again if he had to. She told her about her own attempts in the weeks after to find Linus, to write to him, to warn him, all of which had been intercepted by her husband, who had read the letters and burned them. When she had finished, she did not weep. She had used up weeping in 3 years of nights. Marigold rose. She crossed the small space between them. She knelt in front of her mother's chair, and she took both her mother's hands. "Mama." "Yes. I'm very angry with him." "You should be." "I am not angry with you." Her mother began to cry then. Finally. It was a small, ragged sound, almost soundless, and Marigold leaned forward and put her arms around her and held her, and she thought distantly that this was the second time in 2 days that she had held a person who had not been held in a very long time. When her mother left at 5, she went out alone, on her own feet, with a small parcel in her hands containing a small enamel locket painted with a sprig of rosemary, which Marigold had retrieved from Cheapside that morning and had asked her mother to keep, for now, until Marigold was ready to wear it again. Then she sent Aderin for her husband. He came home within the hour. He found her in the music room. She had not meant to go there. But after her mother had left, her feet had carried her, without consultation, to the door of the music room, and she had gone in, and she had sat at the square piano, and she had opened the lid herself. She did not play. She had no more skill at the keys than her husband did. But she sat with the lid open, and she rested one finger on a single white key without depressing it, and she was sitting that way when he came in. Marigold. She did not turn. Ashford. There is a thing I have been thinking about. Yes, I have been thinking that we were married yesterday in front of 300 people, and that not one of those people has heard what we have said to each other since. He came around the bench and stood in front of her. And I find, in thinking about it, that I don't want them to. I don't want what we are to each other to be a piece of news that London passes from drawing room to drawing room. I don't want our marriage to be a story that is told. I want, if you will let me, to do a thing that I have not seen anyone do before, and which I do not entirely know how to propose. What is the thing? I should like us to be married again. Privately. Tomorrow. With no guests, and no announcement, and no breakfast, and no dowager, and no priest, and no carriage, and no veil. Only the two of us, in the chapel here in the house, with whatever words we choose to say to one another, which need not be any words a priest has ever said. I should like us to make a promise, Ashford, to each other. That is ours, and that no one else has heard, and that no one else can take from us. I should like us to be the only people in the world who know what we have said. And I should like to do this tomorrow, because today has been long, and because I have been a wife for less than 2 days, and I find that I have already had enough of being one in front of an audience. He was looking at her. He had gone very still. Marigold. You may say no. I shall not be hurt. I am not going to say no. Good. I am only trying to think how to say yes properly. I find I'm not very good at properly today. Improperly will do. He went down on one knee. He took her hand and held it between both of his. Yes, he said. Tomorrow. In the chapel. Whatever words you choose. Whatever words I choose. We shall stand in the chapel at any hour you name, with no one else present. And we shall say the words once. Only once, and never again. And we shall mean them. And that shall be the marriage. The other one was a contract. The one tomorrow shall be the marriage. Yes. At 9 in the morning. At 9. He pressed her hand to his cheek. He held it there. He closed his eyes. I have not been this awake in 19 years, he said. I know. In the morning she rose at 7. Adarin dressed her in a plain gown of pale gray muslin that Phaedra had sent up the night before, with a note pinned to the bodice that said, Only wear this. Trust me. The gown was simple and clean and unremarkable, and Marigold, looking at herself in the mirror, thought she had never looked more like the person she actually was. She wore no jewelry. She did not pin her hair. She tied it back loosely with a single gray ribbon. She walked to the chapel alone. Her husband was already there. He had dressed plainly, too. A dark gray coat over a white shirt, no cravat. His hair pushed back from his forehead with a hand that had clearly been used as a comb. The chapel was a small one. 3 pews, a low altar, a single window of plain glass, no priest, no candles burning. He turned as she came in. He waited, with his hands at his sides, for her to come to him. She came. She stopped a foot in front of him. I do not know how this begins, she said. Then it begins now. She drew in her breath. Ashford Halloran. I was sold to you 11 weeks ago by a man I no longer call my father, for reasons that had nothing to do with me, and I walked into a cathedral yesterday morning expecting to spend the rest of my life beside a man who would not look at me. You looked at me. You saw in my face a child you had been carrying for 19 years, and you did not turn away. I cannot promise you that I am the child on the strand. I cannot promise you that the locket means what we both want it to mean. I can promise you that whatever I am, whatever the next 40 years ask of either of us, I shall not turn away from you. I shall not lie to you. If we make children, I shall tell them the truth about everything. If we do not, I shall spend my life beside you and call it a full one. I am 22 years old. I do not know much, but I know here, now, today, that I should rather spend my life learning how to be married to you than do anything else the world has to offer me. That is my promise. He did not speak at once. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat, and he drew out the small painted panel, and he held it in his open palm between them. Marigold Whitcomb, he said, I have carried this for 19 years. I painted it because I believed that somewhere in the world there was a child who had cried when she lost a small green locket, and that wherever she was loved, and that I wanted, more than I wanted almost anything, for her to be loved. I do not know whether you are that child. I no longer think it matters. You are the woman who walked into my cathedral and stopped my breath. And you are the woman who whistled my father back to me. And you are the woman who sat in my library and forgave me 11 weeks of cowardice without making me ask for it. The story is not the marriage. You are the marriage. I shall not give you back. I shall not let you go. I shall not, so long as I am alive, allow you to feel for 1 hour what you felt for 11 weeks. That is my promise. He folded her hand around the painted panel. He kept his hand over hers. They stood that way in the small, empty chapel, with the rain beginning again at the single window, for a long, quiet moment, and neither of them said I do, because neither of them needed to. When at last they walked out of the chapel, they walked out together, and Phaedra was waiting at the end of the corridor with the dog under one arm and an expression of such transparent satisfaction that Marigold knew, without asking, that the Dowager had been informed and had approved and had sent Phaedra to be informed in turn. Phaedra held out her free arm. Marigold took it. They walked to breakfast. It is 6 years later. The morning is bright and very cold, the kind of January morning that polishes the air until distant rooftops look as though they have been cut from glass, and the small private chapel of Ravensmere House stands open, as it does on this date every year, with 3 chairs set in front of the altar and a fire burning in the iron brazier the Duke has had installed because his wife dislikes cold floors. The chapel is otherwise empty. There is no priest. There is no service. There is only an open door and a small painted panel set on the altar in a velvet stand, beside a small enamel locket on a fine chain. And these are the only ornaments, and they are enough. Marigold sits in the middle chair. She has just finished feeding her infant son, who is 3 months old, and called Linus, after no one in particular, although his godfather, who lives now in Northumberland, would be pleased to know it if anyone were to tell him. And no one will, because the name was not given to please him, but because Marigold liked the sound of it. Linus sleeps now in the crook of her arm, and beside her, on the 3rd chair, sits her 4-year-old daughter, Iola, who has her father's slate-gray eyes and her mother's whistle, and a great deal of opinions, most of which she expresses, even at 4, in complete sentences. Her husband sits on her other side. He has just finished reading aloud, as he does on this date every year, the 3 words written on the back of the painted panel, "Please come back." He reads them quietly. He has never read them loudly, not once in the 6 years since the 1st January after their 2nd wedding, when they came into this chapel together for the first time and decided, without discussing it, that they would do this every year, and that the doing of it would be enough. He sets the panel back on the altar. He sits down again. Iola, who has been holding her breath because she has been told, very carefully, that this is the listening minute, releases it with the dramatic relief of a child who has been performing self-control beyond her years and would now like a biscuit. She climbs into her mother's free side. She presses her cold cheek against Marigold's shoulder. She says, very seriously, "Papa." The tune. He smiles. He lifts her over onto his own lap. He whistles his father's tune, low and slow, the same 6 bars Marigold whistled to him in the music room 6 years ago, and Iola whistles it back to him, 2 bars at a time, with the careful concentration of a small person who knows she is doing something important and intends to do it correctly. They whistle it together to the end. Linus stirs against Marigold's shoulder and doesn't wake. After a moment, the Duke lifts his daughter down. He stands. He goes to the altar, and he takes up the small enamel locket, and he brings it back, and he kneels in front of his wife. He does not speak. He opens the clasp. He fastens it around her neck, where it has rested every January morning for 6 years. He kisses the place where the chain meets her skin. Marigold. Yes. Thank you. For what? For coming back. She lays her hand against his cheek. She holds it there. Her husband, who is no longer the man who walked into St. Aldwyn 7 years ago, leans into the hand the way a man leans into a thing he has earned. I never went anywhere, she says. I know. He stands. He gathers his daughter onto his hip. Marigold rises with the baby. They walk together to the door of the small chapel, and the Dowager Duchess, who is waiting in the corridor in a black gown and a soft gray shawl, holds out her hands for the infant. Linus is given over without protest. Phaedra, beside her, is holding the dog, who is now elderly and slightly lame and entirely devoted to Iola, and who lifts his head as the family emerges and thumps his tail twice against the corridor floor and goes back to sleep. The Dowager turns. She walks down the long corridor toward the breakfast room, with the infant on her shoulder and her great-granddaughter trotting beside her, narrating something complicated about a pony she has invented. And Phaedra follows with the dog, and Marigold and her husband walk last, hand in hand, through the long, bright corridor of a house that no longer remembers only the dead, but also, increasingly, the living. There are letters waiting at the breakfast table. Letters from the estates. Letters from Linus Caro in Northumberland, who has, in the 6 years since his appointment, become an excellent steward and an indifferent correspondent, but who writes to Marigold on her birthday and on the anniversary of their second wedding without fail. Letters from Marigold's mother, who has lived in a small house in Hampstead since her husband's death 3 winters ago, and who comes for Sundays. She does not open the letters this morning. She sits down at the breakfast table beside her husband. She accepts the cup of tea he pours for her, plain, no milk, no sugar. She watches her daughter feed crumbs of toast to the dog under the table, which the dog is not supposed to receive, and which the Duke, catching Marigold's eye over the top of the toast rack, pretends he has not seen. She remembers, briefly, walking down an aisle in a borrowed gown, with her father trembling at her elbow, and stopping 4 steps from the altar because her body had refused to take the next step. She remembers the cathedral falling silent. She lifts her cup. Ashford. Yes. What was the tune called? He looks up from his letter. I do not know, he says. I have never known. I have decided at last that I do not need to. Good. Why? Because tunes that have names belong to the people who named them. Tunes that do not have names belong to the people who whistle them. It is ours now. He looks at her for a long moment. He does not answer. He does not need to. He reaches across the table, and he takes her hand, and he holds it, and somewhere down the corridor, a small gray dog snores against a 4-year-old's ankle, and a baby sleeps on a great-grandmother's shoulder, and the rain, which has begun again outside, falls quietly against the windows of a house that has, at long last, learned to keep the people it loves. Outside, in the street, a carriage passes. The driver is whistling. It is not the tune. But it is close enough, on a January morning, to make a duke smile across a breakfast table at his wife, and to make his wife smile back at him. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories find their listeners, because you believe in love that arrives late, in promises spoken in empty chapels, and in tunes that belong to no one and everyone. Do you have a favorite line, or a moment that stayed with you? Consider subscribing if you would like more romances written with this kind of patience and care. Thank you for being here.